course, a lot of people bring their kids to the mall or to the store where Santa is there. And then there was one family that did that, and the little boy brought this big list, and he sat on Santa's lap and he began to go through the list. Santa, I want an iPad, a motorbike, Nike running shoes, and he's going on. And if I could have an iTunes gift card and a set of rollerblades. And Santa's like, well, that's a very big list. I'm going to have to go and look at my, check my records to see if you've been a good boy. And the boy's like, well, no, never mind. I'll just take the rollerblades, Santa. In a more spiritual family where they didn't teach, lies about fat men in red suits, they had their son writing a letter to God, asking him telling him what he wanted for Christmas. And so this boy is writing this letter, and he says, dear God, I've been good now for about 6 months. And he stops, and he's like, yeah. He crosses out 6 months, and he writes 3 months. I've been good for 3 months. And he stops, and he thinks about it a little more, and then he crosses that out and says, 2 weeks. And then he's getting ready to write his list, and he's like, and he crosses that out. He takes the paper, and he crunches it up and throws it in the garbage. He goes into the living room, and there's the coffee table, and the nativity is set up on the coffee table. And he takes the figurine of Mary, and he takes it back to his room, and he wraps it in a little handkerchief and puts it in the back of his sock drawer and closes the drawer and comes back to his piece of paper, and he says, dear God, if you ever want to see your mother again, I'm giving you guys fodder for A&W, McDonald's, the second cup, the water cooler at work. There you go. I'm giving you guys some things to work with there. But, Christmas brings out the best and the worst in us. The best and the worst. You watch the Christmas specials, and you see these, the table is perfectly decorated, and the trees are coordinated, and the clothes are coordinated, and you see these smiley people with good teeth and full head of hair, and they're all super good looking, and you're like, wow, that's the perfect family, and you're like, man, how come I don't experience that? And then of course there's the other side of Christmas. You get the Grinch, and he's all by himself, hiding up in a cave somewhere, and there's the other side of Christmas. You get movies like Home Alone, where people are casing out empty houses at Christmas to steal stuff, and you think Christmas brings out the best and the worst. And sometimes maybe we think to be a Christian or to be part of God's family means you have to have a perfect family. That you have to have this clean sort of background that has nothing scandalous or questionable in it, that everything had to be great for you, and you show up at Christmas meal and everyone's just happy, and there's no problems, no one's sick, there's no broken relationships or unemployed people there, everyone's happy, and you're thinking, how come that's not my Christmas experience? And actually, when you look at the story of Jesus Christ and his background, there are some surprising things that show up. Look who's hiding in this family tree. You'll find out there's a few monkeys in this tree. It's not all the perfect Christmas for Jesus' background either, and actually that should give us a sense of hope today. Because some of you are wondering, well, can anything good come out of what I came from? And amazingly, Jesus comes from a family that is somewhat racy at times. I'll warn you, the stories that are underlying some of the names that come up in the genealogy of Jesus Christ are R-rated stories. They're not ones you read to your children when they go to bed at night. They're racy and hot and kind of, plus 18 ratings. And that's some of the stories that are in the genealogy of Jesus Christ are like that. If you have your Bibles, we're in Matthew chapter 1. If you use the Bibles, we have some actually bigger editions of the Net Bible. If you want at the back, you can always ask an usher. and also in our library, there's a blue one, there's a brown one. If you have a blue one, it's page 1092, it's 977 in the brown one. Otherwise, it's on the screen, and that's fine. But if you don't have a Bible, please grab one. We want you to have a Bible and to take it home with you and to read it on your own. That's great. Read it later. Reread it. That's wonderful. But in Matthew, he writes this thing called the Gospel. It's an account of the life of Jesus Christ. It's not exhaustive. Charles Price said in his commentary on the Gospel of Matthew that he figures that the Gospels altogether probably only account for about 30 days of Jesus' life. That's according to Charles Price. But basically, there was a lot that happened that aren't recorded here. But each of these guys, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, selected stories and events and teachings from the life of Jesus to give us a picture and to show us something about Jesus that they felt like was important. For Matthew, he wants you to know that Jesus Christ is the King. The undisputed King, the promised King, that this King that Isaiah promised, if you were here last week, he said, there's going to be born to us a wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, that Jesus Christ is this King, the Prince of Peace, the everlasting Father, the wonderful counselor, the mighty God. He is what Isaiah 7:14 says is God with us, Emmanuel. Matthew will bring this out throughout his gospel. And so at the very end, you realize this is the King of the Jews, and he is God's promised deliverer, and he's bringing salvation to this world. And that's the whole story of Christmas. But Matthew kind of is writing to Jewish people. To Jews who held genealogy to be important. Your background and your heritage was important to them. And so he's writing to these Jews and saying, look, I want you to see that Jesus Christ is this Messiah. Now, Lisa and I have traveled to Israel. A large majority of Jews in Israel still are looking for the Messiah. They're living kind of half of the Bible. This other part that we as Christians embrace, which starts with Jesus Christ, they don't accept yet. They're still waiting for this deliverer, this king. But there are some Jews that we call Messianic Jews that have said, yeah, Jesus is that king. Jesus is the Mashiach, the Messiah, the anointed one, God's chosen deliverer. Matthew's writing this gospel to say, guess what? Here's the king. It says in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, this is the record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And that idea of the record of the genealogy is, literally can be translated, the book of origins, the book of Genesis, or the account of the origin, the beginning of the gospel. This is how it all starts. This is the record. This is the genesis of Jesus Christ. How did he come about? And who is this Jesus Christ? Well, he's the son of David. Now that, again, is a Jewish term that refers to this messianic lineage, that he follows a dynastic succession of kings. And God promised David that he would have this everlasting kingdom, that his descendants would rule over an everlasting kingdom. And who is this descendant that would rule over this everlasting kingdom? None of the sons of David seem to fulfill that, but Jesus Christ will fulfill that. He is the son of David. That term will come up again later in the Gospels. If you read through the book of Matthew, Gospel of Matthew or the other Gospels, you'll find people calling him the son of David, and that's a loaded term. I mean, David was the most successful king of Israel. He established the borders. He was a fighting man. He was a man of the people. He got out there and really established the kingdom, and everyone kind of turned to them. And Israel was in its most powerful moment at that point, and then with Solomon afterwards. But then it started to fade after that. But there was a promise that a king would come in the line of David that would rule forever. But not only is he coming from the kingly line, but he's the son of Abraham, that he is part of the Jewish race, that he could trace his roots back and into the origin of the Israelite people. Now, you don't understand right now, it's really popular to do this, Ancestry.com, where you find out what your background is, My mom was really curious about this, right? Now, I understand, my grandparents were all four of them, immigrants from the Ukraine to Canada. They were from a kind of a same western area of Ukraine. They all came to northern Alberta and settled there. So my mom's like, I'm going to see. Maybe there's something, exotic in there, right? She was all excited. She paid her $75 or whatever and sent a hair in or however it works. Gets this report back. It says, guess what? You're 97% Eastern European. It was a real disappointment, I was like, Mom, I could have told you that. You could have sent me the $75. I would have told you that, You're Ukrainian. They might can throw a little bit of Polish in there, but it's not much beyond that, Mom. Like it's, it was just, but she was hoping there was, some Spanish king or something, maybe, or something exotic. And so, but, understand, for the Jews, this was a big deal. To trace your lineage back, to prove that one, you had a pure line and that you were following the faith and you were in the right, genealogy. I mean, for certain parts of responsibilities in the temple, you had to show that you were a descendant of Levi or a descendant of Aaron. And so this was a big deal for the Jewish people. Because there was some scandal around the nature of Jesus Christ, even to this day. there are men and women doing research out there. Well, we found this, this tomb, and there's this document that maybe alludes to the fact that maybe Mary had a little liaison with some Roman guy, and, blah, 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 blah. They're trying to discredit Jesus. Why? Because if Jesus is just another guy that kind of came out of a bad night, somewhere in a dark corner, then he's not the king. He's not the Messiah. He's not God. He's just another nice guy that led in a period of history. But if he is the Son of God, if he was conceived miraculously, if everything that is said about him is true, then he is incomparable in history. He is the King of Kings. He is God's chosen king. And he qualifies uniquely to be the Savior of the world. And so you understand, as you read stuff, as you watch television specials about Jesus, beware. They're really cool. There's lots of historical stuff, but oftentimes their presupposition is, let's leave it hanging. Is Jesus really God? Well, we don't know that, but there's this possibility, and they're showing you, different vaults, different tombs, different, there's movies, there's books written about it, but understand, we got to get back to the real book, Jesus, the Bible. And Matthew says he is the son of David, the son of Abraham, and then he goes on to talk about his genealogy. And you think, okay, Jesus came from the perfect family. Well, as you look through these names, you'll find some surprising stories that kind of pop out of there. And typically the pattern is, this guy's the father of this guy, who's the father of this guy, the father of this guy, the father of this guy. When the pattern breaks, you got to stop and say, okay, why did they break the pattern? He's trying to draw your attention to something. But the first three are kind of the heads of the Israelite nation. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. The big three. The fathers of the Israelite nation. Abraham, of course, a great man of faith, left his home, went to a land he never saw before. I mean, he's held up in the New Testament as a model of faith, but he's hardly a perfect guy. I mean, Abraham's the guy that gets to Egypt, and Pharaoh's like, whoo, your wife is hot, and he's like, oh, it's not my wife, it's my sister, or who is that lady? It's my sister, and he sends her into Pharaoh's harem, and this is Abraham, the man of faith, ditching his wife into Pharaoh's harem. And then all of a sudden, things start happening, and he's like, why didn't you tell me she was your sister? And, it's like, this is the father of the nation of Israel. He has some skeletons in his closet, and yet God uses him. God makes a promise. You're going to have a son, and you're going to be the father of a great nation. This guy's childless, and he's hitting into his 60s. He's got no kids at all. His wife is they just can't seem to make that happen. And he's like, you're going to be the great nation. He's like, how is that going to happen, I don't have any heir to assume my estate, just Eliezer of Damascus, this servant of mine, but God has a plan. Abraham and Sarah are going to have to learn to be patient and trust in God's plan. And they finally do have this child of the promise, Isaac. Isaac has two sons, Jacob and Esau. And Isaac and Rebekah, his wife, are just play favorites. One likes one likes the other. It's a totally dysfunctional family. It's awful. It's a horrible story. I mean, one's getting preferential treatment over the other. Jacob deceives his father into giving him the birthright, the right of the firstborn. And it's just like, it's a story of families being torn apart. This is in Jesus' genealogy. Jacob is a schemer, a deceiver, and he meets his match in his father-in-law, Laban, who deceives him and schemes and takes advantage of him because he fell in love with his daughter. And I mean, so and it says there, Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. There, the family begins to get bigger. He has 12 kids through 4 women. Now, does that sound like a healthy family to you? 4 different women, 12 sons. I mean, now we've got serious family dysfunction. And the book of Genesis makes that very clear. But God works in it. Now, he mentions Judah because Judah is the kingly, the royal line from amongst the 12 tribes. But then in verse 3, we find it gets interesting. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, by Tamar, in brackets. By Tamar. And so we're going to have these women that show up in the genealogy. It's not normal, it's not customary, nor was it required, but Matthew includes the mention of several women because he wants to show us something about the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Tamar actually married Judah's son, The Bible says this about he was evil and the Lord killed him. So, she really knew how to pick them, right? And And so Judah's like, okay, well, the custom was if your brother's wife died, you were the younger brother, you bore a child with that woman so that his line could continue, right? So his little brother Onan is like, hey, Onan's your job. But he's like, I don't want to have a kid because then this kid is not going to be my kid. It's going to be my brother's kid. And so he, again, this is like, yeah, it's X-rated in the Bible. Basically, he doesn't do what he needs to do to make that happen, and God kills him. There's a third son, and now Judah's like, okay, everyone that this girl has sex with, they die. So I don't want to give her the third one, and so he's like, well, just wait, and then and he's kind of just holding her off. She's back with her parents, and it's like, and then she realizes as time goes on, he's never going to let me have the third son, never. Now, a widow in the ancient Near East. Horrible situation. Your hope and the prospects for your future were incredibly limited. I mean, the idea of retirement in the ancient Near East was you had lots of kids, so they looked after you in your old age. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it, right? They took after you, right? And your kids were your heritage. Your kids were your wealth. Your name was continued through your children. And so here she is. She's like, I got nothing. I'm in a dark corner, and this is the rest of my life. And so she gets desperate. She knows her father-in-law is going to be heading up to this place where they're shearing the sheep. She dresses like a prostitute, puts on the veil, stands at the gate of this town where she knows her father-in-law is going by, and obviously does something to get his attention. And in that moment, he's a grieving widower. He hasn't, has his needs, and he sees this girl, and because it shows you the character of Judah at that time, he goes in and has a night with a prostitute. And they kind of negotiate the price. It's going to be a goat. She's like, well, I know, like, how about you just give me your seal and your staff, and when you bring me the goat back, I'll give you it back, kind of a deposit. Okay, sure, and it's done. He goes on to do his things. He sends his buddy back with the goat. His buddy comes back to town, and he's like, hey, where's that prostitute? And the people of town are like, what prostitute? The cult prostitute that works this town. He's like, there is no cult prostitute that works this town. And he's like, well, that's weird, eh? So he comes back with the goat, and Judah's like, oh, I'll just forget it, whatever, And then, all of a sudden, Judah hears the news. Guess what? Your daughter-in-law is pregnant. So, all right, bring her out and let's burn her. Literally, that's what he says. Bring her out and let's burn her, And he's like, finally get rid of this trouble, for once and for all, right? And bring her out, She's like, okay, before you burn me, this is the father of the child. This is his staff, his seal. He's like, wow, you're more righteous than I am. And so she gives birth to these twins. And one of these twins becomes in the lineage of David, the greatest king. But this is how it happens. There's this horrible R-rated plus 18 story embedded in Genesis chapter 38. I preached through Genesis before. I conveniently skipped that chapter because I was like, I don't know how to preach this. How do you preach that story? It's like, little warning on the website of the church. Please be careful. This may have some subject matter for adults only. But this is in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. So if you think that your family has some scary things in your past, look at this. We haven't even gotten hardly into the first paragraph, and we've already got this racy story. But God is going to keep his promise, even in the dysfunction of the people in the genealogical record. Basically, since Genesis chapter 3, where sin enters the world, all we find is this type of issues, this reality. He continues there. He says, Perez is the father of Hezron the father of Ram, verse 4, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon. I was taught you just got to read the names like you know it, and everyone will think you're saying it right because who knows how they're pronounced, right? So that's what So if you ever have to read those, just give it confidence. If it sounds weird, so people are like, oh, I never knew it was said like that. Just do it, right? So Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, bracket, by Ruth. Interesting. Ruth shows up there. Now, there's a whole book of the Bible in the Old Testament dedicated to Ruth. It's a wonderful story. Love the story of Ruth. It's fantastic. But again, it's one of those stories that it surprises you. Because there's this woman, and this woman and her husband and her two sons leave Bethlehem and go to Moab, which was not always the friendliest people to Israel. Moab was a group of people, descendants an ancestral relationship between Lot and his daughters. So, I mean, that's your family history. Yeah, our grandpa and his daughters, it's gross, but that's what it is. Moab and Ammon, that's how they came about. And so Ruth kind of came from this group of people that weren't always friends with Israel, and it was a history. In fact, the law said that a Moabite for the 10th generation was not allowed into the temple area or the tabernacle. But Ruth is one of these ladies. Her mother-in-law and her father-in-law show up with these two boys. She marries one of the sons, and then all of a sudden all the men in the family start to die, and all you're left with is 3 widows. And Naomi decides to go back to Bethlehem. She tells the girls to stay behind, but Ruth is like, no, I'm going with you. Ruth is a widow. She is a Moabite. Her prospects in Bethlehem are very limited because, one, she is a widow, and 2, she's a Moabite. But she comes to Naomi, and she's turned in faith. She's like, your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. She's turned in faith to God, and even though she grew up in Moab, she is embracing the God of Israel, but she's going to Bethlehem not knowing what's going to happen. And through that whole story, you got to read it. It's a wonderful story. She eventually meets this guy named Boaz. And they get married. He's probably older than her. And they have this little guy named Obed. And he becomes, great-grandfather to David, the greatest king ever. And this Moabite girl, from the outsider, a person that we would normally shun if you were in Israel, you'd kind of ignore her, you wouldn't talk to her, you wouldn't even look at her. She becomes part of the royal lineage of the Messiah. Like, who would have guessed? You think your family is full of tragedy and awful situations in your background? Well, Ruth can relate to you. But God can redeem that for his glory, and he does in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, and includes Ruth in that genealogy. It says there in the end of verse 5, Obed the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of David the king. So you realize. So here we are, he's tracing the genealogy, and we get to David the king. And already we've got there's some bright spots there. It says David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. And again, make note here. Who is this woman? Well, if you read the Bible, you'll discover in the other portions of Scripture that her name is Bathsheba. Now, the story of Bathsheba and David is, again, 18 plus, don't read it to your children. It's kind of like, read it to your teenage boys, maybe just to kind of help them to, get their heads on straight. But it's not a great story. I mean, the King David's out on his porch in evening. His armies are out fighting, and he's not fighting with them. He's kind of waking up from his mid-afternoon nap, comes out, looks out, and woo, there's the girl bathing out there. Now, ancient Near Eastern scholars will say a woman didn't do that unless she wanted to get the attention of the guy up on the balcony. Now, you can judge for yourself whether or not. Now, David's responsible for his actions. He invites her up for tea, let's have a nightcap, And, well, they do have a nightcap, and then she goes home and is pregnant by the king, right? And it's like, whoa, what do we do now? Well, let's bring your husband back, and hopefully, he's been fighting for a long time. He'll come back. He'll do what husbands do when they've been away for a long time, and then he'll think it's your child, and it'll be great, and he comes back, and the husband's like, I can't spend time with my wife when my buddies are out there fighting, and so he sleeps with the slaves. He doesn't even go into his wife, and she's like, he won't even come to bed with me, and David's like, what's this guy's problem? He's so devoted, and so he sends him back to the battle. He tells the commander, look, pull up to the wall and then pull away and leave the guy stranded and let him get killed, and he does that, and the guy gets killed in battle, basically by David's command. And then he brings up Bathsheba to his, into the palace, and they get married, and then Nathan the prophet comes along, and it's like, man, what are you doing? Tells a great story and catches David in his sin. And David repents, but there was consequences. In fact, the family of David was never the same after that. Never the same. I think David and Bathsheba made their peace with God, and the son dies, but the next son that's born is Solomon. And he's the one who becomes perhaps the greatest king after David in all of Israel's history. But the starting of that relationship is very sketchy. I don't think any of us would be proud to call that part of our family heritage. But God is using it to accomplish his eternal purposes. He doesn't even name her in Matthew's genealogy. It's like, that woman, the wife of the Gentile, the Hittite. Bathsheba. Solomon, verse 7, the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asa, Asa the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, Joram the father of Uzziah, Uzziah the father of Jotham, Jotham the father of Ahaz, Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Ammon, Ammon the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of their deportation to Babylon. Okay, I could talk about these kings, but I'll just leave it. You need to read your Bibles. Some of these stories are horrible. Some of these men didn't follow God. But what he says basically is like Abraham to David, a significant portion of Israel's history. David to the exile, a significant portion of Israel's history. What happened here? All these kings came along. The kingdom got worse and worse and worse, more splintered, more splintered, more splintered. And finally God says, I'm pulling you guys out of the land that he promised to Abraham. The land that Joshua conquered with the conquest. The land that David established the borders and enlarged the borders of, now is gone. The Israelites are deported. And it would never, ever return to that status ever again. To this very day. Never has Israel been what it was in the time of David. And after the deportation of Babylon, verse 12, Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel the father of Abiad. The father of Eliakim. Eliakim the father of Azor. Azor the father of Zadok. Zadok the father of Achim. Achim the father of Eliud. Eliud the father of Eleazar. Eleazar the father of Matan. Matan the father of Jacob. And now it's starting to slow down. We're getting somewhere really close. Jacob the father of Joseph. The husband of Mary, by whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. You notice the changes there. Jacob is not the father of Jesus. Joseph. Joseph is the husband of Mary. He is the legal father of Jesus, but he is not the biological father of Jesus. Matthew is making this really clear. Understand? And now, of course, you're like, well, how does that work? He'll tell you in verses 18 and on. That's where the story typically starts. That's usually where we start preaching. But I want to give you the background. I want to start where Matthew starts. He's like, here's the family tree of Jesus. And in 3 sections of 14, he doesn't include everyone. He kind of edits the genealogy so that he has 3 concise groups of 14. Abraham to David, David to the exile, exile to Mary and Joseph. God is intersecting human history with Jesus Christ. Mary gives birth to Jesus, who is the Christ. Now again, we're used to calling Jesus Christ because that's what the New Testament calls him. It's like his last name. But in the Jewish understanding, Jesus was just the boy who grew up as the son of Mary and Joseph, the carpenter guy. Maybe Jesus of Nazareth, he came from that region. But to call him Jesus the Christ means that he is the anointed, chosen king that will deliver Israel and be established forever and ever as the enduring king over an enduring king, to present Jesus as this king. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation of Babylon to Christ, 14 generations. It's that God has been working through history from the very beginning, from Abraham to David, from David to the exile, from the exile till now. God has been working. We can trace the lineage of Jesus Christ. He is not this sketchy child from some, back alley, late night kind of escapade that Mary had. No. This is not the story. Although some people would suggest that. Jesus has a miraculous birth. But his human genealogy is full of skeletons. It's full of shadows. It's full of guilt and shame. Just like my family background, just like your family background. There are parts of our histories that each of us would like to delete, to take that black, thick-edged, marker and just cover over so no one can read it. Let's just forget that ever happened. Let's forget about that, thing that happened 2 generations ago. Let's forget about that thing. And we want to just sort of, make our history a little cleaner and a little lighter. And Matthew comes out and says, let me give you the history of Jesus Christ in all of its color. Tamar, Ruth, Bathsheba. Oh, and I missed one there. Rahab. Rahab. You see that? Salmon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab. Rahab is the prostitute. Joshua chapter 2 and chapter 6 mentions her as the prostitute. The prostitute. Even in the New Testament, she's called Rahab the prostitute, a woman of faith, but that moniker never left her. She was always known as the prostitute. She was living in Jericho, running her trade, doing her thing. These foreigners show up. God has been working in her heart, and she realizes that the God of Israel is the true and living God. She welcomes these guys in. She hides them on a roof. The guys come like, where are those guys? Obviously these guys are, okay, these foreigners showed up. They go to the prostitute's house. Oh, we know what they're doing, And then she hides them, and she's like, I realize your God is the real God. And they're like, okay, well, here's the deal. We're coming in. This city's going to be destroyed, but if you hang out this rope and you don't tell anyone we're coming, we will save you and your family. And they do it. And she's got this really, really elementary faith in God in that point, but she's like, I believe in this God. One family survives. It's Rahab's family. The whole city of Jericho is completely destroyed, except for one family. She marries an Israelite guy, and she joins the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Chances are your family background doesn't have this type of raciness. There may be some sketchy stuff in all of our backgrounds, but this is heavy stuff. But God works in spite of our sin to accomplish his purposes. And the idea is that when Jesus becomes a part of your family, it can change forever. That you don't have to be defined by the past sins of your ancestors, but that you can be defined by the reality that you joined the perfect family. The glory of Jesus is that you can change those patterns of behavior. Some of you grew up with some horrible families or patterns in your family. It's abuse, it's addiction, it's an ability to deal with conflict or anger. There's all sorts of stuff that we tend to just propagate in our own children if we're not careful. But when Christ enters your life, it changes that, and that doesn't have to define you anymore. What defines you now is that your relationship with Jesus Christ, and you move forward and you change some of those patterns. It's a glorious opportunity to make something new. My own family is the testimony of this. My mom was from a broken home when there were very few broken homes. Everyone in her town knew them as the family that wasn't together. There was abuse there. There was all sort of neglect. It was just horrible. But she encountered Christ with my father, and they changed the pattern. They reset the script. It changed forever. And I'm here today because while that was part of my genealogy, it's not anymore, because we've been walking in this perfect family now with Jesus Christ. And yeah, we've made mistakes, but that doesn't define us. And she changed, and my mom and dad changed those patterns, and they didn't bring that into their family, and we're not bringing that into our children. And you can actually stop those patterns with Jesus. That's good news. And Matthew brings these women out, and there's some sexual stuff there. There's, history. There's, racism. There's all this stuff. And he's like, and that all ends because of Jesus Christ. He's the king for everyone, not just for the Jews. He's the king for the widow, for the disenfranchised, for the outsider, for the person who has no hope, for the person who's looking for peace and has not found it anywhere. Jesus Christ is that king that can bring you that. That's the story we bring to Lloydminster this Christmas. That there is a king who has been born. He is Christ the Lord. And no matter what skeletons and shadows lie in your past, Jesus is prepared to move forward with you in the present and for your future. And to forgive that, and to redeem it actually, and to use it for his glory. It's a beautiful thing that only Jesus can do. That's the message of Christmas. You're looking for peace. You're looking for hope. And we've got these two candles lit reminding us of the hope and the peace of Christmas. Well, Matthew says, here it is, Jesus Christ. And yeah, his human background is sketchy. But God accomplished his purposes even through all that. And he can, and he still does today, through ordinary, flawed, messed up people like me and you. He says, I still want to continue, and I will use you, and I will redeem the mistakes you've made, and I will turn it out for my glory if you just trust me and walk with me by faith today. And so I point you to Jesus Christ today, the Prince of Peace. Didn't come from a perfect family, but he created the perfect family. And we're here today, flawed, messed up people. But God is chiseling away at us and making us into the people he wants us to be. That's what New Life's all about. Moving up and out of new life in Jesus Christ and allowing God to chisel us and to fashion us into more like Christ in every step that we take. Despite whatever our background is, God is taking us forward. If you don't know Jesus Christ as your Savior, this Christmas I invite you to receive him, to embrace Jesus Christ, to confess your sins and say, I want to be part of a perfect family. And I want to move forward. I want you to redeem whatever my past was and guide me forward now in your steps for your glory. And that's the story of these women in this genealogy. I mean, they just trusted by faith in God, and God used them in spite of all the circumstances in their life. And we can trust in God in the same way. And Mary, who finds herself in this awkward situation of being unmarried and pregnant, and living her whole life with the stigma of this child that was born that everyone knows wasn't Joseph's, lives with this peace in her heart knowing that this was God's plan, not mine. And I was fulfilling his plan, even though other people said all sorts of things. I know who Jesus is, says Mary. And today we can say we know who Jesus is. And we know the difference Jesus makes in our life. And no matter what people define us from the past, Christ can define our present and our future as we belong to his family forever. Would you pray with me as we close? Team's going to come up and